One of the first world leaders to congratulate Donald Trump was Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who called it, quote, a huge victory. Over the years, Trump and Netanyahu have had a chummy relationship. Aside from Trump's brief criticism of Netanyahu after the October 7th attack, Trump publicly calls the Prime Minister by his nickname, Bibi. They both say they talk often. Netanyahu says he's spoken to Trump 3 times over the last few days. But one of the more unexpected world leaders to congratulate Trump was the Palestinian president, Mahmoud Abbas, in a phone call on Friday. It was these two men's first time talking since 2017 when Trump, on behalf of the United States, controversially recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital and moved the U.S. embassy there, sparking days of deadly unrest. According to a statement from the Palestinian presidency, Trump, quote, emphasized his commitment to stop the war and reiterated his willingness to cooperate with President Abbas, end quote. Joining me now is the editor-in-chief of Foreign Policy magazine, Ravi Agrawal. Ravi, good to see you. Trying to gauge how the world's feeling about Donald Trump. There are certainly people in the world who really have trepidations about this. Mm-hmm. The Ukrainians, the Europeans, particularly in those states close to the Russian border. But there are a lot of world leaders that you point out are okay with Donald Trump, partially because he's so transactional.
Yeah, exactly. And nakedly transactional. Yeah. So if you're a country that really relies on alliances that, has sort of put its cap on the peg of democracy and human rights and stands by that, then you're really worried about a Trump presidency because he shakes things up. Yeah. If the old order worked for you, the Trump order may not work for you. Europe is anxious. If you are India or Indonesia or Nigeria or Kenya or a whole bunch of countries in the global south, right, the jury's out. I mean, they might want a transactional leader in the United States that is not calling them out for human rights problems or problems with their democratic processes. They want transactional. So right, it's a mixed picture. But I think for us to reflexively think that world leaders are not welcoming Trump would be untrue.
And by the way, when we talk about transactional versus ideological, it is where China has gained strength in Absolutely. The world, right? It's people who are allied with China or doing trade deals with China or getting their highways or trainways built by China are not subscribing to China's political ideology. Exactly. They're happy to take China's trade relationships and money.
Right, exactly. And over the last 15, 20 years, one big global change that has taken place is more and more countries count China as their top trading partner than the United States.
Right.
Right? That shift has been in part because Chinese money has come with strings attached, by the way, debt diplomacy, for example, but it hasn't come with the strings of human rights and democracy or other things. That is attractive. Now, America was making a case over the last decade that our strings are better strings. They're aspirational strings. Right. They're the kinds of things you want to do, that your people, crucially, would want to do.
Right.
That changes.
Let's talk about China for a second. On one hand, Donald Trump has said he's going to impose, 200% tariffs on electric vehicles and then 60% tariffs on everything else. That is not something that either the Chinese are going to want to happen, and by the way, probably American consumers are not going to want to happen. But Donald Trump, this is where he's sort of got 1% of truth in everything he says. China needs to be dealt with in some fashion. And there are a lot of people who think, particularly as it relates to electric vehicles and other manufactured goods, there should be a harder line on China. Sure. What's China actually thinking about this?
Well, the Chinese are also worried about instability, but like everyone else, they're making back-end overtures to, the people in his orbit to try and understand how much truth there will be to his threats on tariffs. Trump loves tariffs, but I think at the same time, the biggest thing we're going to look at in 2025 is how many of these tariffs he actually imposes, because it's not just globally. I mean, tariffs would be bad for any country that it is imposed on. Protectionism hurts. It hurts domestically as well. So there will be a ripple effect, as you and your reporters have been pointing out, economically and in a range of other industries. So with the Chinese, I think they're waiting and watching. Taiwan is the other area of great interest on that front. The Taiwanese as well have been making overtures to Trump world to try and get a sense of how Trump would deal with them. They, of
Meaning
course,
if China were to actually be more aggressive and maybe even invade Taiwan.
Exactly. So would Trump support them or not? And on that front, again, the jury's out. And this is where everyone is playing to Trump's transactional nature. Right. The big difference between 2016 and 2024 is that the world has seen who Trump is, and they are going to use that to their advantage. So if the Taiwanese feel that, they need to tell Trump, here's what you would get out of this relationship, whether it is better trade terms on semiconductors,
Right.
whether it is TSMC opening more factories in the United States.
Right.
If you tell Trump what he wants to hear, or that he's getting X, Y, or Z out of a deal, it might work.
It might take it. And Taiwan does have some leverage on that front. But the Taiwanese question is really interesting because Elon Musk was on a conversation reportedly with Vladimir Putin in which Putin asked Musk not to activate his Starlink satellites in Taiwan as a favor to the Chinese.
Right.
Vladimir Putin is definitely a happier guy at the end of this week than he was at the beginning of this week.
You would imagine so. I mean, with the reported 7 phone calls he's had with Trump over the last 4 years, who knows what has gone on the back end there. But I think Putin, either way, was waiting for this election to move things along, whether it is in Ukraine, whether it is in their burgeoning partnership with China, North Korea, and Iran. North Korea is very interesting as well, where, Donald Trump had that sort of meeting with Kim.
Yeah, they fell in love.
They fell in love, apparently. And Kim has now sent several thousand troops to fight alongside Russia in Ukraine. So there's this whole sort of burgeoning quartet of chaos, club chaos, whatever you want to call it. And how Trump deals with them will be very instructive. I think the Putin thing here is interesting because now that Putin is allying with other countries, including Iran, that muddies the waters a little bit.
I feel like I get a continuing education credit for having you here, my friend. Nice to see you, as always. We appreciate it. We'll have many more of these conversations. Ravi Agrawal is an old friend, and he's the editor-in-chief of Foreign Policy magazine. All right, still ahead.